Hey SpellGround fans, Japji Khalsa here. You're looking at the new HallowedGround playmat coming out, Pumpkin Spice. It's going to be out this weekend. And this is on our new fabric, the V6. I want to take you on a quick tour of all the fabrics we've done, because we get a lot of questions. You know, how's it compare to V1? How's it compare to V2? You know, and people have preferences, what their favorites are. And honestly, every fabric is a little bit different and has its own fans. So we're going to talk a little bit about what V6 is, and we're also going to explain to you and show you pictures of V1 through V5 to kind of do a quick comparison. We think the V6 is fantastic. It's a nice fabric, and there's a lot of positive things about it, which I'll be talking about. So thanks for joining us. Check it out. Hey SpellGround fans, so as I just mentioned, we're going to go through all of the various fabric types right now so that you have an understanding and we can answer some questions about how the different fabrics compare to each other. In front of me, I have version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So let's go back to 1994 and talk about V1. V1 was the original fabric. We loved it. Everybody loved it. And I'm not going to say it's the perfect fabric, because honestly, every fabric is imperfect in its own ways. But it was a great fabric. And here it is. It was a little fuzzy. It would take ink really well, and you could put ink on it and not feel the ink, in part because it's not very thick. The backs of V1s are a bunting. They're this sort of fuzzy bunting. They're not really a threaded backing or a glued backing. It's a fuzzy bunting. And that's part of what made V1 special. Now, the downside of V1 way back when was two things. One is that sometimes a V1 fabric would get a little bit, it wouldn't have the fuzz. It just kind of came off the roll, and it was almost more plasticky in some ways, but we tried to filter those out and not sell them. The other downside is that because it's bunting backing, it's a little bit lighter, and the mat would move around on the table more than other mats might because it wasn't very heavy, but people still loved it, and it is the classic mat. But now let's move on to V2. So many years later, we come into V2, and V2 is almost a perfect fabric too. In some ways better than V1 because it's not quite as lightweight. It does have a different backing. It's got now this threaded backing. It would take ink pretty well, although you can feel it a little more. And it was a really good fabric. Now, this is a good moment to mention that the business of fabric in this country and in the world is a very volatile business, and companies come and go. So one of the reasons we don't get V1, and we can't get V1 anymore, is that it's not made anywhere. Nobody makes a fabric like that. V2 had the same challenges, V2 and V3 when we get to that. They were made by a company that just suddenly closed its doors and went out of business, and it was a microfiber company. And this is the nature of the SpellGrounds over the years. We always are kind of always looking for new fabric. So V2 is really great, not very thick, kind of leatherish like, and but smooth at the, you know, a little fuzzy at the same time. That was V2, a good product. Now let's go to V3. V3 was thicker and has a little more pile to it. The ink sits on top of it a little bit more, but it was a really nice feel to it, and it also, one of the challenges we had with the V3 was that because it was kind of thick, that when we would cut it, it wouldn't always cut perfectly square. It had this way of sort of getting little waves in it, and when you cut the square would not always come out square. So we had a lot of loss of our product when we would create the V3s, and we'd sell them as seconds, a little bit off square. We had kind of tolerances, but that's what V3 was, and it was also a really good fabric, pretty popular. That led to V4. Now, V4 was a special challenge. It's a great fabric. It feels really nice. It really has a great hand, so soft, so smooth. It holds the ink okay. You can still feel the ink on top of it a little bit. The downside for us and for our customers on the V4 were two things. One is that it would tend to fray along the edges, and you'd get a little bit of dangling threads here. That was a challenge. The other thing that would happen sometimes for us and made it a challenge to work with was that V4 was, because it was a lighter fabric, it would not react always very well under the heat of the screen printing process. And we would get some curling or bending or shrinking. And that would sometimes make things out of square a little bit. That was a challenge, but it was a great fabric, good fabric. The fraying was the biggest challenge there. So we wanted to address that and move forward. Ultimately, this company also shuttered its doors. We can no longer get V4. So moving on to V5. Now V5 was a kind of a nice experiment, the Ultra V5. We actually love the V5. It's the heaviest fabric we have. And when you put it on a table, it feels great. The hand on it feels great. It takes ink pretty well. It sits on top still a little bit. The challenge with V5 was that it was really expensive, a really expensive fabric to buy. And that made it, for us a challenge, for you a challenge too to pay for it. And the other thing was that sometimes the ink would sit on top a little bit and not go in because it's so thick. And we'd get a little bit of, ink coming off just real subtle, like sometimes better than others, and just depend on the mat, how it was printed. We really liked V5, and again, this is a challenge, and because of the price, we wanted to try to find something different. So this summer, we went to New York City, we went to the Fabric District, and we looked for what was going to be our next fabric, and that would be what you're looking at right here, V6. Now again, it's not a perfect fabric, but this is a pretty darn good fabric. What's really fun about this fabric is it's got a good hand. It's not quite as silky smooth as like the V4s were. It's a little bit coarser on the fabric itself, but it takes ink really well. You can still feel the ink on top of it, but the ink goes into it too at the same time. So you're going to get kind of a mixture of the two. This particular fabric that we're getting that we call V6 now is 100% cotton, which is actually new to us. Everything up to this point has been polyester and microfiber. This is cotton with a great feel to it. We have a pretty good color choice in this particular fabric and this brand that we're going to be getting for V6. So this particular mat has got this nice yellow, orange, pumpkin color working for us. And we have other colors to choose from coming down the line, depending what we're doing. So for us, the other thing that this mat does that's fantastic is it doesn't shrink. There is no size shrinkage on this. When we run it through the heaters on the screen printing, it just stays the same size. The printers love working with it, which is good for us. The other interesting thing about this is the backing is very unique. This is not a backing that we've used before. As you can see, you can kind of see that there's sort of threads going through here, but there's a layer that's bonded across all of those threads, and it has its own sort of unique feel to it on the back. So we believe, and this is our first release of this, that we're going to get much less of the fraying issues that we've had. Now, a couple of things we've noticed about this mat and this fabric. We do notice that the edges, when they get cut, they look a little rough, and it probably has to do with the thickness of the fabric. And sometimes you do get a little bit of dangling thread on it because there are still threads in it. So that is the HallowedGround V6 fabric. Now, we think this is an absolutely beautiful mat, but we're not completely 100% happy with it. And that's because of the edges, as I mentioned. They're a little bit rough on pretty much every mat for this release. So because we want you to experience the V6, we want to get these in your hands as soon as possible, we're going to release these at a discounted price of $44.95. Now V6 going forward will be $59.95, and we think we can address the issues of the rough edges with our cutter and fix those, but this particular run, the edges are rough on pretty much every mat. So we're going to give them to you at a discount. And we want you to experience V6. We want you to tell us what you think about it. We think it's fantastic. Please don't tell us about the edges. We know about that. But in the meantime, you can get a great mat at a good price. And looking forward to bringing you more of these V6 mats.